Thank you, Ben, for inviting me. So we're going to talk for 10 minutes, which is not a lot of time, about SQL Server backups. So I've underlined what you need to know because we cannot possibly cover everything. And there was never any illusion that we could, because the last time I spoke about this was for 75 minutes. But there are two basic principles when it comes to SQL Server backups, and that is that you are not backing a database up. You are preparing for a disaster recovery. You are not backing things up, because if you back something up and never test your backups, then you'll never be able to restore. So when we talk about recovery planning, there are two main concepts that you need to consider. The recovery time objective, or RTO, which is how long do you have to restore the database? If there is a disaster, and that is described as any unplanned outage. If there is a disaster, how quickly can you bring your entire environment back online so that your business can continue? Now, a lot of folks would say, oh, we can do that in 5 seconds because we have high availability. Well, what if that goes away? So we're talking about disaster recovery here. And usually recovery time is measured in minutes or hours. Anybody who measures disaster recovery in minutes has a lot of money or is smoking something. And I mean that with the greatest respect, because it is almost impossible to do a full environment recovery in minutes. Unless, of course, you have a whole bunch of virtual machines in Azure. So there's the plug for Microsoft. You're welcome, Ree. So recovery time objective speaks to how long you have to restore your database or your environment. The second concept that we talk about is recovery point objective, which is RPO. I know RTO and RPO sound the same, but that's why we go about time and point objectives. So how much data are you prepared to lose? We measure this in time as well, because databases are transactional, and one transaction happens, then the next one happens. So you cannot measure it in storage. So you measure it in time, and usually it's measured in seconds or minutes. And this one's an interesting one, because once again, it is almost impossible, unless you have a lot of money and a really, really great environment, to be able to recover to a point in time just before the disaster happened and be able to restore everything to that exact point in time. There is usually a small window of time that you will lose something, or that things will stop and you won't be able to recover that last part. There are ways to get around that, but that could take longer or cost more money. So we measure that in seconds or minutes, and those two concepts, the recovery time objective and the recovery point objective, are the two things in your service level agreement that your business will agree to, that the technical team has to now come up with a recovery plan using SQL Server backups. So we're coming back to the main topic at hand here. The backup chain is the thing that we describe on how to do your RTO and RPO, how to restore that environment so that you can come up to that point in time that your disaster happened. The first one is called the full backup. The full backup is an exact copy of your entire database. And we're talking at just a database level here. I'm not even worried about environments and so on. Your full database, every single data page inside that database is copied to a backup file, plus whatever transaction log you had during the time of the backup took place, because backups are not free. It starts at a point in time and it finishes. And during that time, things are happening in your database. So the full backup does everything inside the database, as well as all the transactions that were in play from the beginning of the backup to the end of the backup, so that when you do a recovery, you have all of that stuff that it can redo or undo before you continue on to the next step. Now I'm going to skip to the end there to the transaction log backups, because the differential backups we'll come back to. Basically, you're going to be doing your full backup once a week, let's say. You don't do it every night because you're going to run out of space on your storage array. You want to do it once a week, something like that. Then you're going to do your transaction logs every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, depending on that recovery time objective. If you remember, we spoke about how much time do you have to bring your environment back online, and then your recovery point objective is how much data can you afford to lose. The transaction log, that data that you can afford to lose, is going to be a window that is half the time of that period. So in other words, if you can afford to lose 10 minutes of data, your transaction log has to be every 5 minutes, because you're copying your data off site, right? So you're going to have your backup running every, let's say, 15 minutes, and then it goes off site. That off site has a delay attached to it. So you're not going to have 15 minutes of data loss from that offsite backup. It's going to be longer than that. So you have to bring your transaction log backup period down so that it can be within that window. And then differential backups, this is the example of, let's say, once a day. These are not incremental backups. These are everything since the last full backup up to this point in time. And it also goes and looks inside the database to see what's changed. It's not quite an incremental backup like the transaction log. So it's a shortcut. So you do that once a day. And then this is the big summary here. The full backup gets the party started. The transaction log backup is the incremental backup, the one that takes place every X number of minutes. And then the differential backup is a shortcut between them. So if you want to recover to a Saturday and your full backup was last Sunday, you would have your full backup from Sunday. You would have your differential backup to Friday, and that would just cover the gap between Sunday and Friday. And then your transaction log backups would be everything from the time that the differential backup took place to the point in time now. I mean, that's a lot of stuff to comprehend, but that's basically it. Full backups, transaction log backups, and if you want to do a shortcut, differential. But of course, this is meaningless because right at the beginning, I said, you need to test your backups. In fact, a week ago, I went to Twitter and I said, hey, Twitter, what is your #1 tip to talk about backups? And of course, the #1 tip was test your backups. That's the tweet. But if you're interested, I have a whole bunch of people who replied to me. Most of them were useful replies, except for William, but he's not here to defend himself, so what can you do? So apart from William's comment, you can read everything there, bit.ly/SQL-backups, all lowercase, and there's a lot of interesting information there. In fact, some of it might be overkill for the topic that I asked, but that's Lonnie. What are you going to do about Lonnie? I would encourage you to read that. And so in the last 3 minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the tips and tricks that were brought up and some of the stuff that I've done in my own career to manage your backup environment, make sure that you are able to restore, setting you up for success. I'm going to start at the bottom right, and normally I wouldn't, but because Marla was presenting a couple of sessions ago and spoke about SMO and scripting and all that kind of stuff, I wanted to mention quickly that DBA Tools, which you can get from dbatools.io, uses SMO in its backend, and it's a PowerShell environment. So you can script everything you want about your SQL Server environment from DBA Tools, and then you can check that using DBA checks. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. And now we're going to jump right back to the top left there. Ola Hallengren is a longtime data platform MVP who has written a free maintenance solution, which is available from the site ola.hallengren.com there. And you can do backups, you can do consistency checks. You must always do a consistency check before you do a backup. You can do index maintenance, you can do statistics maintenance, a whole bunch of stuff free of charge, recommended by most folks in the industry. That's not the only one out there. There are others as well. I just want to make it clear that there's only so much places on my slides here and only so much time. Then you want to monitor your backup solution. This one seems logical, but let's say that you're doing everything through SQL Server Agent. So you've got your agent doing all of the maintenance plans and all those tasks. What happens if the agent goes down? How do you know that the SQL agent isn't running? Well, you've got to monitor that. So that's just a cheap example of how you need to monitor your backup solution. Make sure that the tool that you're using to run the backups, which should be the native backup, is being monitored so that you always are assured that your backups are taking place. You might actually have somebody going every week to look at the backups off-site to make sure they're there. The way they look might be with a script, doesn't matter, but you need to have somebody looking to make sure that everything's working. Then I want to mention here in our last minute, a file system snapshot is not a backup. There's no consistency checks. There's no way for a file system snapshot to know that there's corruption in the database. If you're not doing a check DB before your backup and then doing a native backup with checksum, you don't know if your data is corrupt until you have to restore it. And that's not the time you want to find out. So if you are doing file system snapshots, you should also be doing full backups as well at an increment of maybe once a week or once a month. And then build your recovery script when you take your backup. Steve Stedman from Stedman Solutions has a great little script that runs every time a transaction log runs, and it builds a script. So when you want to recover to that point in time, you just reach for that script and it'll recover the full backup, differentials if you've got it, and the transaction log backups. And then with 10 seconds to go, that's me. I've got a blog, I've written some books, or co-written, I haven't written them by myself, I never want to claim that. There's my Twitter. Don't go there for SQL advice, and then my email address. And that's me done. Thank you, Ben.